Thank you. And if I could now invite Bal to come to the lectern.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Chief Justice, distinguished judges and guests, friends, and organizers of this wonderful conference, thank you for conveying such a gathering at such a critical time. The speakers in the morning have laid us with a platform, and I think the Deputy Chief Justice has amplified that up a note to also lay the challenge. Thank you, the presenters here. Judge Virgil laid the doctrinal and philosophical foundations. I'd like to do some reflections on the other spectrum of a more practical challenges or practical insights. The Deputy Chief Justice charged us to be courageous. I think that's a key point I'd like to run through my presentation. And a key question I'd like to leave with you, if you forget everything that I've said by the end of my presentation, a key question perhaps you can reflect on. Are we, in our judicial and legal engagement, governance, are we emboldening the promise or perpetuating the disappointments for the environmental rule of law? I'd like you to ponder on this question as we go into this. In 2024, I met a young Solomon Island girl. Her name, Cynthia Honaihu. Cynthia Honaihu would be one of the leaders that laid the foundation for the student-led advisory opinion at the highest court, the International Court of Justice. The decision came out last year. A tectonic decision that uplifted climate and environmental justice across the world. The historicness of that endeavor cannot be overstated. It involved the highest participation of state actors, and the very fact that it was mounted by a school or students, law students, at a Pacific University. If you've gone to USP, you will see their classrooms. It's not compared to ANU, where I'm from. It's not a challenge mounted by Harvard or Yale or Oxford, but by Pacific student at Pacific University. So I asked Cynthia, what drove your team to this challenge? Because I was in awe of their action. And she goes, Bal, desperation. Desperation for justice. It wasn't academic pursuit or litigation funness to pursue something like that. It was desperation, young people looking around and seeing that the existential threat of climate change and environmental harm is real. But the justice institutions put upon them the promise for the delivery of the justice wasn't coming forth. So they had to look somewhere else and perhaps bring their voice to a place where then it can come back home. And that happened last year in August, where ICJ brought home to our shores statements of courage, statements that we can rely on in our pursuit. Second scenario I'd like to paint, something that I was involved in. Tuvalu, and the Chief Justice is here, also had a moment of courage. In 2023, confronted with the reality that their state would no longer be in existence due to the rising sea level, and noting that the Montevideo Convention of International Law does not provide an exception for statehood to be preserved when you are displaced, they took something that confronted the international law. They said, we will declare in our constitution perpetuity of statehood, challenging Montevideo Convention, challenging international law. But for our people, this is what we want. And let's see what happens. So they did. I was humbled to assist in that process. We went to the islands doing consultation. 2023, it was passed. The first country in the world to declare in their constitution perpetuity of statehood despite climate impacts. They can be displaced, but their will is to preserve that statehood. Because statehood, land is not just land, it's the metaphysical connection, it's the spiritual connection, the identity, and they want to preserve it, even if it's underwater. Behold, 2 years later, International Court of Justice affirmed Tuvalu's innovation. And they said, yes, states can preserve their statehood despite climate change impact. Create directly an exception to the Montevideo Convention, an initiative of courage led by Tuvalu, challenging the status quo. The ICJ case by the students, an initiative of courage led by the students, faced with desperation, challenging the status quo. The constitutions of the Pacific have promises, Papua New Guinea included. Promises that the Constitution will provide for environmental protection, environmental awareness, so that governance, development can be conducted with that awareness. My research demonstrated that Papua New Guinea, of all the Pacific Constitution, including Australia, Papua New Guinea has the most environmentally conscientious constitution. Sitting on the other side is Australia, with the least environmentally conscientious constitution. How did Papua New Guinea arrive at that point? Papua New Guinea conducted the most exhaustive consultation in the history of global constitution up to date. In post-colonial constitutional history, PNG consultation to gather the will of the people remains historic. Over 2,000 submissions and 600 meetings, visitation to 13 countries. No other country has come closer to that. And through that, they found the will of the people is to preserve, even the insects is mentioned in the Constitution, in the National Goals and Directive Principles. Judge John Goldring of New South Wales looked at the PNG constitutional undertaking and he declared in these words, it is unparalleled in comparative constitutional law history. Judge Kenny and other post-colonial judges from Australia sitting on the PNG bench in the 1970s looked at the PNG constitution and said it is the truest autonomous constitution, homegrown constitution, reflecting the will of the people. And so we arrived at the ultimate question, 50 years on. And how is Papua New Guinea fare in delivering on the promise? Some indications suggest a careful analysis of this question. For instance, Papua New Guinea is the only of the 7 countries in the world to allow deep sea tailings placement, which means the direct deposition of toxic mining waste into the seas of Papua New Guinea, seas of the Pacific. It is happening as I speak. Tons are flooding in. As I speak, logging is happening rampantly, with difficulties in regulation, enforcement. With little watch, illegal logging is going on its own ride. I do commend the Chief Justice and Justice Derek Wood and the team in setting up the REC Court, Resource, Environment and Climate Change Court, the first initiative in the Pacific. I think this is a good signal. It shows we are responding. The promise, we want to deliver on the promise. I also commend judges and some of the writings of the Deputy Chief Justice in seeing the exposition of the right of life extending to the right to a healthy environment. I know there's a need for support in that channel. I'd like to take you now to two judgments, and I will pick up some practical reflections with how we can deliver on the promise or extenuate the disappointments. First judgment, 2 weeks ago in Solomon Islands, the High Court of Solomon Islands awarded the country's highest compensation award to a community for illegal logging against a foreign developer. 62 million Solomon Islands dollars. But unfortunately, the developer has left the soil, winded up before the judgment came out. In 2011, 15 years ago, in this country, late Justice Devani delivered a judgment in Ambayak, Kiunga Ambayak case. 225 million plus logging compensation against illegal logging, destruction of forestation. 15 years later, not a cent has dropped from that. The problem, same thing. The developer has left the soil, leaving struggling villages with little resources, unable to pursue extra-jurisdictional or international legal enforcement of the judgment. What does that mean for environmental rule of law? It is one thing to deliver the judgment, judges, but it is the other thing to see it through. And if that's not happening, the job isn't complete. May I respectfully lay that challenge. Some practical reflections. Adding on to this, working with NGOs and parties across the Pacific, they face a challenge, the requirement for undertaking as to damage when it comes to injunctive relief. When there is serious environmental crisis, logs and trees and cemeteries and cultural sites are being destroyed and people want immediate relief, they come to the Chamber of Justice wanting justice. The court turns around and said, one of the requirements for you to be here is undertaking is to provide damages in the event that you failed. So the villager back off because they don't have the money. They fear maybe the land will be taken over, giving that undertaking in injunctive relief. The requirement for full consent when it comes to representative action in a country, in a region such as diverse, geographically challenged, with a lot of diversity within communities, getting consent is a challenge, a memo challenge of itself. And as we ponder on those processes, trees are being cut, water pollution continues. How can we overcome those challenges? In fact, in some instances, developers act sinisterly to create division within the consenting landowners, and therefore you have divide and rule, undermining the justice process. I have talked about the escape of judgment. So such a predicament creates disappointment in the constitutional promise of our people, undermine the public confidence in the judiciary as the guarantor of justice, and create serious gap in the environmental rule of law. The promise given but cannot be delivered fully. Late Justice Devani said, the judiciary is the last bastion of hope in a sea of uncertainty. Such a prophetic, such a profound exposition. Something that will hold up in her legacy. I guess the challenge is mounted onto us. Are we the last bastion of hope in a sea of uncertainty in such circumstances? How does the hope work in this space? What should be done? I know you will have your own recommendations and what needs to be done from your own experience. My humble suggestion from the examples I have used, there are three. First, perhaps reassess our judicial procedures. Maintaining the principles for justice, but the procedures, are they becoming barrier to realizing the promise? How do we work better with it? To reflect Papua New Guinea's circumstances, Pacific circumstances. Because that notion, very principle, was what drove the CPC in their homegrown pursuit of a constitution, to reflect the PNG society and its needs. Second, to rethink precedent in the light of an environmentally conscientious constitution. There may be some precedent that was already been done some years ago. But in the light of the ICJ, in the light of this movement for environmental consciousness in lawyering and judging, is it now time to rethink some of those precedents? And third, more practical one, pursue reform for cross-jurisdictional enforcement. Because justice, the road of justice is not finished if enforcement cannot be seen at the end of it. As for judges, this calls, in fact, the ICJ decision when it came out, some scholars refer to the ICJ judges as activists. It's expected from a Western legal conception. But for Pacific, for Global South judges, and for PNG judges, you have a much larger mandate than that narrower view that try to dim the leadership role given to you. PNG Constitution mandate your leadership. Thank you. And so the Constitution calls for judicial leadership. And this goes to the heart of that, judicial leadership. I come back to finish with my opening question. Are we, in our judicial and legal governance engagement, emboldening the promise or perpetuating the disappointments? Thank you.
We will now invite